My name is John Randall, and although most people see me as a successful businessman, all my wealth, mansions, and expensive suits cannot erase the emptiness that settled in my soul 30 years ago. On that day, I lost my younger sister, Rachel. She was only 15 at the time, and she was more than just a sister to me. She was the light of my life, the one who always reminded me that there was more to life than the endless race for money. When she disappeared, my life was divided into before and after. I threw all my resources into finding her, hired the best detectives, but the search was fruitless. Years passed, but I never managed to come to terms with it. This heavy burden of memories haunts me even after all these years. Every time I look at old photographs of Rachel, my heart aches with longing. One detail stands out in particular: the pendant that she always wore. It was our family pendant with her name engraved on the back. That pendant became a symbol of her disappearance, constantly reminding me of what I had lost. Recently, tired of the city's hustle and the endless stream of meetings, I decided to spend the weekend at my country estate. There, amidst the fields and forests, I always found peace. That day, I decided to walk around my land and explore the surroundings. I remember the sun standing high in the sky and the breeze gently blowing on my face. And then, in the distance, I saw a young woman working in the field. She looked simple, in old jeans, a shirt, and a straw hat. It was Emily, a farmer who had lived and worked there for several years. I knew her by face, but we had never exchanged more than a few words. I don't know what prompted me to approach her at that moment. Perhaps I was simply looking for a distraction, some conversation, or maybe something inside me sensed the approach of an important discovery. We talked about life, about how hard it is to work the land. I was surprised by her calmness, her strength. She seemed simple, but there was something in her eyes that made me listen to her words. And then I noticed it. The pendant. It hung around her neck, glistening in the sunlight. My heart froze. It was that very pendant. Its shape, design, color, everything matched. I even felt dizzy from the shock. It seemed as if the world around had ceased to exist, leaving only that small piece of jewelry. I tried to pull myself together, continuing the conversation, but there was only one thought racing through my mind. How did that pendant end up here, with this woman? When I returned to the estate, I couldn't find peace. 1,000 questions were spinning in my head. How was this possible? Why did she have the pendant? Who was she really? I couldn't rid myself of these obsessive thoughts. That night was one of the longest of my life. Insomnia and anxiety tore me apart from the inside. At dawn, I realized that I wouldn't be at peace until I knew the truth. The next day, barely waiting for a reasonable hour, I went to see Emily again. It wasn't easy for me to start the conversation because without knowing the whole truth, I didn't want to frighten her. When I approached her house, she greeted me with a smile and kindness. I tried to start a conversation, but words came to me with difficulty. I was overwhelmed with emotions, constantly battling the urge to bluntly ask her about the pendant. But in the end, I couldn't hold it in. I pointed to the pendant and asked where she got it. In her eyes, I noticed surprise and a hint of confusion. She fell silent for a moment, lowered her gaze, and, in a slightly lowered voice, replied, "This pendant belonged to my mother. She died when I was just a child. It's all I have left of her." Her words cut through me like a knife. She knew nothing about her origins. At that moment, fear gripped me. If this was truly Rachel's pendant, then her mother was my sister? I stood there, feeling a ringing in my ears and a lump in my throat. Could it really be true? I decided not to say anything more and left, feeling a plan forming inside me. I immediately hired a private detective and tasked him with finding all possible information about Emily's past and that of her mother. I needed to know the truth, even if it turned out to be shocking. A few days later, the detective came to me with his report. I opened the folder and began to read, feeling a chill run down my hands. The information was vague, but one detail made me freeze. Emily's mother had lived on the farm under a false name and had never told anyone about her past. In the documents, there was a record of a woman with the initials RR who gave birth to a daughter in a local hospital about 30 years ago. My heart skipped a beat. Those initials, they were hers, my sister's. I began piecing the puzzle together. Everything pointed to Rachel living here under a different name. While the detective was digging into the details, I decided to spend more time with Emily, trying to learn more about her. She turned out to be an incredibly kind and open woman. Her stories about her childhood moved me to the core. She grew up alone with her mother and lost her at an early age. She had to fight for her place in this world by herself. In her words, her manners, and her quiet resilience, I began to see traits of my sister. This changed everything. If she was truly my niece, then I had found at least a part of Rachel. But how could I tell her this? How would my family react? When Michael, my eldest son, learned about my investigation, he was furious. He immediately saw Emily as a threat to his future. He had never known his aunt, but the thought that some stranger could lay claim to the inheritance deeply disturbed him. Michael was determined. He hired lawyers to legally secure his control over our family assets. I was stunned by his actions. Two voices clashed within me. One wanted to protect the family legacy, and the other insisted that we had to help Emily. There was one last step left, to conduct a DNA test. I submitted my sample to the lab and told Emily that it was important for tracing her roots. She didn't know what to make of it, but agreed. Several agonizing days of waiting passed, during which I hardly slept. I kept thinking about what I would do if my suspicions were confirmed. Finally, the results came. I opened the envelope, feeling my hands tremble. And there, in black and white, was the truth. Match 99.9%. Emily was my niece. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of emotions wash over me. Joy, sorrow, fear, they all mixed together. Before me lay a difficult choice: to acknowledge her and potentially disrupt our established world, or to try to hide the truth, thereby betraying my sister's memory. I decided that I could no longer keep this to myself. I invited Emily to the estate, asking her to come in the morning. She arrived in an old, creaky truck and looked a bit anxious. We sat in the living room, and I began telling her my story, starting from Rachel's disappearance. I watched as her face changed while I spoke, as she froze and then looked astonished. She sat across from me, confused and pale. "I'm your uncle, Emily," I finally said. "Rachel was my sister." She closed her eyes, and I saw a tear roll down her cheek. I felt a growing pain in my chest, as if someone was squeezing my heart in a vice. I wanted to hug her, to comfort her, but I didn't know how. Her shoulders trembled as she tried to process what she had just heard. And then, the living room door burst open. Michael stormed in, his face twisted with anger. He shouted that it was all a lie, that I shouldn't let some farm girl destroy our family and take what belonged to us. I jumped up to stop him, but then Emily raised her hand. "Stop," she said quietly but firmly. "I don't need your inheritance. I never intended to take anything away. I just wanted to know the truth about myself." Michael fell silent, his eyes widening. I saw his anger turn into confusion. He didn't know what to say. I turned to Emily, and I was overcome with a tremendous sense of respect. She was willing to forego everything to preserve her honor. "Emily," I said, trying to hold back tears, "I want to help you. I will give you a part of our fortune, but only if you decide what to do with it." She looked at me, and I saw strength and determination in her eyes. She nodded and quietly replied, "If I accept it, I will use it to improve the farm and help other people here. I don't need luxury. I just want to do something meaningful." With those words, I felt the weight pressing on my heart begin to lift. Standing before me was Rachel's true heir, strong, honest, and willing to help others. I turned to Michael, and for the first time in a long while, we looked each other in the eye. I saw a flicker of doubt in his gaze, and I realized that he was starting to rethink things. Later, Emily and I stood on the hill, looking over her farm. The air was cool, and for the first time in many years, I felt a sense of peace. We remained silent, and that silence spoke louder than any words. I knew that our family had changed forever, and although there was a long road ahead, I was ready to walk it alongside Emily.